1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Did they give you a class on this at seminary? That you
we've all learned it on the fly.
Yeah.
Oh, some days are better than others.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I won't keep you, but I thought it was very interesting what you had to say about Bonnie Clyde. Jackie went to the funeral and I couldn't.
I didn't realize it until it was over with, so it was okay.
I don't think you can go any higher with the mic, can you? Can you put it any?
I don't know.
I think that's about as high as you can put. Yeah. Oh, you know what?
I tend to project fairly well, so it picks up.
You just project. I think you'll be fine.
Gets in all this technical stuff.
Do you pronounce your name Haubrich?
Yeah, phonetically it's Haubrich. Okay.
Yeah, you'll need a mic because they can't hear you at home without it. So. There you go. You have to speak pretty close.
Okay.
Sorry.
And here. Okay, welcome. Why don't we get started? Can everyone hear me? Okay, we're delighted today to have Dr. Paul Haubrick with us. He's a retired UWM professor of education, a board member of Forest Home Cemetery for almost 20 years, senior tour guide at Forest Home, and a member of St. Paul's Church. I see he's made some connections with people before his talk today, which is wonderful. His presentation today is on cemetery art and symbolism. Thank you for being here.
Okay, thank you. Just a little bit about cemeteries in early Milwaukee before we begin our tour here. In the early days of Milwaukee, we're talking late 1830s, early 1840s. Bringing the bodies up and the caskets back up and stuff like that. So they entered into the discussions of developing the cemetery. A lot of that was driven by senior living. Anybody living in real estate house, originally picked as real estate. And the good Reverend Benjamin Ackerman, who had come to Milwaukee from Cincinnati. And it's the two of them that introduced the idea to investors to buy property. So they began looking for property in 1846. And finally settled on 72 acres, way outside the city. We're looking for a place for burial that was pleasant times. And so they purchased 72 acres. It's now essentially the corner of Forest Home and 27th.
Oh, there's your mic. Oh, I'm sorry.
No.
Sometimes we have trouble with our system.
You want me to use a hand mic?
You know what? No, the battery. Yeah, use this, and then I'll get you the battery. Actually, is on that one.
Is this in your job description?
This is
Okay. I don't know which one I'm operating on now.
Well, whatever you're doing right now is working. Yeah. Just keep going.
All right, we'll keep going. So they came up with the idea of developing a cemetery. They purchased 72 acres. Actually, the property was purchased from the Hull family. Lemuel Hull was the second rector of St. Paul's. He came to Milwaukee in 1839. He died in 1843. He must have had some money because he purchased 100 acres of land at that location. And back in those days, by the way, you could buy an acre of land for $1.25. And a lot of the early people who came to Milwaukee were land speculators. And so they bought property in hopes that it would go up in value. And lo and behold, it did.
Keep going.
Okay. And that's why we were located at that particular.
This one is good. That one's good. You just keep one.
Okay.
Going down. You're doing great.
This is like your cafe style. Okay. So they began the cemetery there. They hired a man by the name of Increase Lapham to design the cemetery. He was very familiar with Mount Auburn Cemetery, which is in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I always tell my friends, if you're going to Cambridge, don't go to Harvard, go to Mount Auburn. And if you haven't been there, it's a spectacular cemetery. It's the first of the great garden cemeteries in Milwaukee, and in the U.S., and many of the other garden cemeteries are patterned on that particular model. When St. Paul's founded the cemetery, it was meant to be a cemetery for the city and not for Episcopalians. It wasn't meant to be a religious cemetery. In the practice of the day, there were certain kinds of cemeteries. There was a Catholic cemetery, a Lutheran cemetery, and then the three small city cemeteries. The city cemeteries closed out, and what remained were Catholic Cemetery, Calvary, which is on Blue Mound and Hawley, and when St. Paul's brought Forest Home on, it became, for want of a better term, the Great Protestant Cemetery. The advertising over the years that it was a non-for-profit for all faiths, rather than saying for everybody, it was for all faiths. They advertised it accordingly. If you were African American, it was the only cemetery you could be buried at. Back in those days, discrimination was discrimination, as people understood it back then, and you couldn't get in. Today, we're 189 acres after the original 72, and we have approximately 25 acres of open space, which means we probably have enough opportunity for another 100 years of burials before we close. At some point, cemeteries always close because they run out of land, and becomes a difference there. We're the first crematory in the upper Midwest. The crematory is located in the basement of the chapel. I'll show you a picture of that later on. Back in those days, the practice for cremation quite different than what it is today. The family would hold a service at the chapel at Forest Home. The body would be lowered into the basement area. They would go downstairs, push the casket in, and sit and wait for the cremation to be finished, and then take the remains with them. Interestingly enough, in the first maybe 10 years, most of the cremations were from out of state, because it was the only place that you could get cremated in essentially the upper Midwest. It's home to Milwaukee's 25 of Milwaukee's 43 mayors. They're scattered throughout the cemetery. It's home to Blatz, Schlitz, Pabst, Gettelman, Graf, and others. We have actually what's called the Beer Baron Tour. It's probably the most popular tour that we have. Everybody wants to know about the Beer Barons, and that's just kind of Milwaukee history and the way it plays out. We also have a lot of Milwaukee's industrialists, Epialis, Pfister and Vogel, Harnischfeger, Nordberg, and others. We just have a whole raft of them in the cemetery. A lot of them are just very interesting people. Epialis came to Wisconsin to run a tannery. He ran a tannery up in Manitowoc, eventually sold that out, came to Milwaukee, and bought a bankrupt machine company. And his first big contract to become the great Allis-Chalmers Corporation was to build the city of Milwaukee's first freshwater system, water coming to the home. And if you've seen the pictures of the old pumping station at the base of North Avenue, that was built by Epialis Company, and he also built all the pipes. The water was run up North Avenue to what's called the Reservoir Hill, which is still there, and that created the pressure to bring
water down to the city of Milwaukee. And the company spent decades putting in, so to speak, water pumps all over the place. All right, let's talk a little bit about cemetery art and symbolism. One of the advantages of this cemetery was the time that it was founded. That period of time between 1850 and the First World War, cemetery memorialization had a whole different meaning than it does today. If you were anybody of means, you had some kind of monument on your lot. And the more the means you had, the greater what you had. But they memorialized themselves in many different ways, and we'll see once how that plays out. Let's see if I can get the right button here. Okay, we memorialize ourselves by our occupation. This is Otto Nimmer, 1884 to 1909. He's a fireman. We can tell that by the hat. And he died being a fireman. He died as a result of an injury from that. So he's memorialized himself in that particular fashion. Here's two other memorializations. On your left is Matthias Stein. And as you can tell, he's got guns on there. He wasn't a gun advocate. He was Milwaukee's first gunsmith. And his office was on Water Street, generally the location of where what used to be M&I, now known as BMO, that he was located at that particular spot for it. He has a relief of himself. I don't know if that's an actual relief of him or one that would have been standardized by stone cutters. The one thing I can tell you about this marker, as old as it is, it's still clean. It hasn't been impacted by the environment. If you go through the cemetery, you'll see markers that have gotten old. One of the things I learned is stone comes in degrees of hardness. And if it's soft, it absorbs all the acids that are in the air, the dirt, etc., and it deteriorates over time. This is called Barry granite from Barry, Vermont. Another thing, if you're going to travel and you're in Vermont, go to Barry because they have a very large granite quarry there. And go to the cemetery because a lot of people who worked at the quarry were carvers, and they carved their own headstones, and it's kind of interesting to see them. One of the things, if you get in the cemetery business, you go visit cemeteries elsewhere. It's just the way it is. Over on the right, we have, obviously, it's a train. This is Max Shuster. For decades, we thought Max Shuster was a railroad engineer, which was kind of a status job in its day. However, when we finally dug out his obituary, he fell off the train in Kenosha County. He worked for the Milwaukee Road, but he fell off the train and died, but he was memorialized in this particular fashion. We'll come back to this one later because we want to look at the family monument that's there. Okay, a little louder. Okay. Then we have women in mourning. We have a lot of women in mourning at Forest Home. We have no men in mourning. The reason primarily is, as best we can figure out, is the male spouse died first. So the woman wanted to demonstrate their mourning, and in the Victorian era, that was extremely important to do. If in 1875 your husband passed away, you would be in black for 1 year. And everybody talks about Queen Victoria and her being in black all the time. It was for her husband, but she came from a very extensive family where some relative was always dying. And if you had a relative, you would go in mourning for them as well. And so we have women in mourning. I want you to notice the pose. It's that pose with the head down in a state of mourning. And you will see, particularly in the left side here, the BAME, holding a wreath. And you'll find the wreath throughout the cemetery. The symbolism there is interesting, and I'll get to it in another marker. This is the Pfister monument on the right. That monument is for Guido Pfister, Pfister and Vogel Tanning Company. The rest of the Pfister family is there as well, but it was for Guido that they put the marker there. And it's an interesting piece. This picture is taken 1920s, early 20s. We tried to date it, and there's nothing there, but we did a lot of guessing by what's in the picture. This is the Pabst family monument, okay? And so the way it's set up is the left side is the Pabst family, the right side is the Shandine family. Shandine is the brother-in-law. He married another one of the best girls, okay? Pabst married a daughter of Jacob Best, who was actually the founder of the brewery. And she had another sister, Emil Shandine, married her. He was an accountant. He ran Pabst on the inside, and the captain himself was really a social promoter, and he did all the other side of it. Something that you can't see completely the way the picture was taken, but I want to show you the date of the picture. First of all, you will see that on each of the graves, there's what's called a grave blanket. It was very popular 1880s till First World War. And each summer, they would plant a blanket of myrtle. In the fall, that would be removed, and they would get a blanket of evergreens for the winter. It was just symbolism, being respectful of your family. And that began to fade away as an option at the end of the First World War, and today we don't see any of that anymore. One of the things, and we don't get a complete picture of it, but you will notice that there are a series of markers here that are slightly smaller than the others. The Pabst family had 10 children. Of those 10 children, only 4 made it to adulthood. So if you look at it, you will see the marker in that row on the left is an older child, made it beyond 10. 6 kids never made it to 10 years of age. Reasons for that are many. We have thousands of child graves in the cemetery, particularly from 1850 on. And the reasons were simple: clean water, sewer. Once the city puts in clean water and once the city puts in sewer, infant mortality rates drop dramatically. One of the other issues is that in 1870, 1880, 10 years of age was time to go to work if you were a male. So it just was a really complex. Over the years, we've raised that age from 10 to 12 to 14 to 16. Now it's 18. I think in some cases it's in the 20s today before someone has to take responsibility for things. It's an interesting marker. If you come today, you'll see it's deteriorated somewhat. It's marble. Marble's a soft stone. It does not do well in Wisconsin. If you were in southern Italy and it was nice and dry, you could put marble out and it'll do very well, but not in Wisconsin. It stains badly from the weather. But again, a woman in mourning, and notice she has the wreath. Okay. Another example, this is my favorite. Of all the women in mourning, it's the most unique. She's raising up to the vase, okay? And the vase is used extensively in combination with what I'll call the pyramid, not the pyramid, of the obelisks in the cemetery. And it's really goes back to all things Egyptian were being discovered in the mid-1800s by the British. And the vase was there used for carrying things for the next generation, so to speak, carrying to the next afterlife. And so it's that. It's I think the artistic work on this is quite good for a stone carver. This is one to teach you how to read a marker. Again, we have a woman in mourning. Many people think this is an angel, but no wings, you're a woman in mourning. You are not an angel. Angels must have wings. As you can see, she's got her head down and she's holding the wreath. Now the question is, what's the symbolism of the wreath? When in life might someone give you a wreath and don't say Christmas? Correct. You're going to win the prize today. It's a symbol of victory. So now what's the victory? It's the great promise, right? Ascension to heaven, it's the victory in life. And it's used extensively throughout the cemetery, the whole symbolism of the wreath. It's the victory that's there. Notice that this looks like natural stone. This started out as blocks of granite that were carved to look like natural stone. It's not natural stone. If you'll notice the markers that are in the front, they have a little scroll on them. Now this is a takeoff of what a modern day cartoon might be, is what happens when you enter heaven. That's right, there's a law. St. Peter is there and he's got the book. If your name's in the book, you're in heaven. If your name's not in the book, you're not in heaven. And so they're telling you that their ancestors have gone to heaven, okay? And so it's a story that plays out. And an unusual thing you'll notice frequently in the cemetery, not everyone, but a number of them will use 3 steps, okay? That number 3. How do we use that number of 3 a lot in terms of religion? The Trinity, God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Ghost. They didn't have to put a cross up there. They put up another symbol of it, and that's the 3 steps that are used in monuments. Here's a row of obelisks, very popular. Most of the obelisks are much smaller than what you see in this location. But it was very popular during the Victorian era to use the obelisk as a family marker or monument, however you want to refer to it. In the cemetery business, we talk about them as markers as opposed to monuments, but everybody else is monuments. There's another example. This is C.K. Hamilton. He was a Civil War colonel, made some money after the war, and had this nice obelisk created in his just outside this picture, maybe down another 30 feet, is almost the same obelisk. And it's a man by the name of Lewick. Does anybody remember the name of Lewick in Milwaukee commerce? Milk and, yeah, ice cream. Ice cream, it was the big deal. His great invention in life, remember, when you had refrigerators at home, those refrigerators had those real small freezers on the inside, and you couldn't get a lot of ice cream in there. And ice cream tended to come in larger quantities way back when. So Mr. Lewick had the idea of producing it in blocks, cutting the blocks up, and creating pints of ice cream. It made him a fortune because he held the patent on it. He sold it to Seal Test ice cream, and then took his money and enjoyed life, I guess. But that's it. This is the Schrader monument. This is the Schrader Angel. And the monument, and Schrader, by the way, is the Schrader Hotel. This whole area is populated by Schraders. There's like 3 large graves for the Schrader families, and they're there. The structure that's behind the angel is designed to be a doorway or an entrance. And again, when you see that style, it's the entrance to heaven, okay? In the Victorian era, when artists were producing symbols of heaven, they generally used the concept of a Greek temple or a Roman temple as depicting heaven. And it plays out quite a bit. The markers that are in front here, they're actually facing, we're seeing the back side of it. Thousands of these in the cemetery. It's called a pillow monument. It's got that rounded top, and the significance is a peaceful rest. And you see it quite a bit. It's a cast iron, it's a bronze. It's aged nicely with the patina that's there. I really hate to say this. There's another Schrader monument with almost the same angel that someone stole. This is the Chapman Angel. This is probably the best piece of sculpture artwork that we have in the cemetery. It's Daniel Chester French, probably the most famous sculptor in America. He was born in 1850, died in the 1920s. His most famous work is Lincoln at the Lincoln Memorial, but he did a number of commissions throughout the United States. The Chapman here is the Chapman department stores in Milwaukee, Timothy Chapman. She's holding a plate, and what it says on the plate is that they shall never thirst, that they, going into the next life, she's really quite nice. She had a patina like the other one, but she was coming apart, so the family came in and had her restored. There's an internal structure to this piece, and the wings were sagging and the arms were way down, and she had to be rebuilt on the inside, and then they redid her completely. As you will notice, she's in front of a sarcophagus, okay? This is our sarcophagus style. A lot of these throughout the cemetery in different sizes, different designs, so to speak. Notice again the wreath, and then you'll see torches, but the torches are upside down, that life has been extinguished. It's just that symbol that's there. As you can see, we have another woman in the background. This is Mrs. Schneider. Mr. Schneider was a liquor wholesaler in the 1800s. She's doing one of the things that instead of being a state of mourning, she's got her hand up. And what she's telling you is the old man's gone to heaven. Okay, that's how that plays out. There's another angel, very masculine. It's really unusual to see an angel of this style. This is Robert Ingersoll Aitken, who is also an American sculptor, and he's probably most famous for doing the pediment at the U.S. Supreme Court. Every time they show a picture of the Supreme Court on TV and people protesting in front of it, if you look up at the roof line, there's a large sculpture that's in there. It's of 9, it's not actually 9 justices, but 9 symbols of justice. And he sculpted that. Couple of, maybe 5 years ago, I was giving a tour on a Sunday afternoon, and we had a group of kids that were part of it. And kids don't mind going to a cemetery because they can run around and they can do different things. But if you stand behind it, okay, this little kid nailed it. He said, "It looks like Batman, Dad. It looks just like Batman over there." Because it got this really large wings associated with it. It's an interesting piece. There's another example of an angel with the Christian cross, and behind it a stylized obelisk that's there. This particular monument is replicated in a number of different ways, not only in our cemetery, but in other cemeteries. I've seen it throughout the Midwest. I throw this in. It's not necessarily a piece of artwork. This is the Blatz Mausoleum, largest mausoleum in the Midwest until maybe 10 years ago, where someone else built a bigger one down in the Chicago area. Originally, Blatz was buried elsewhere in the cemetery. His wife was not happy about that. She thought he needed a better memorial. So she commissioned this to be constructed, 1901, 1902. If you go inside, Mr. and Mrs. Blatz are in sarcophagus right in the middle, And then on 3 walls are drawers. You pull the drawer out, and you can get 2 caskets in a drawer. They had burial capacity there for 40 caskets. The Blatz family is still around, and they use this, but they're all choosing to be cremated. And you get about 50 cremation urns in one of those drawers. So this has got at least 500 years to go before they begin to fill that one up. As you can see, extensive use of flowers display, very common up until Second World War, when memorialization process changed quite a bit. We went from large monuments to mom and pop graves. It just changed dramatically in style over years, but this is interesting. This is the Epialis Mausoleum. The style there is temple. This is the entrance to heaven. And it's the family still uses it. Most of them are out of town. Interestingly enough, because there's enough land around it, they're choosing to be interred outside rather than inside. It's family choice, but that's just what they tend to be doing. This is my favorite sarcophagus in the cemetery. It is what you call over the top. It's just really done more than what needs to be. And I always show it. You can do what you want to memorialize yourself. This is T.L. Hansen. Hansen Moving and Storage. If you remember the old commercials that used to be on TV, that's who it is. By the way, this is in section 36. This is the same section that the Chapman Angel was in, a couple of the obelisks that we saw. If you ever want to go to Forest Home Cemetery and just take a nice walk on a Sunday afternoon, find a map and go to section 36. It's all there in one section. That was the A section, so it's okay. This is another sarcophagus. And this is Mr. Payne. Mr. Payne was involved with the early days of the Monkey Electric Light and Railway Company, today known as We Energies, but he was also Postmaster General of the United States. And so that's all laid out on the inscriptions on the front. As you can see, behind it is a different style of sarcophagus. It's meant to be looking like a temple, but they don't have the columns on it, and so it doesn't work that way. This is called the Unfinished Life. When I first encountered these, I couldn't figure out what they were trying to say, so I had to do some digging to figure it out. On the right is Mr. Gerlach, and there's an angel and a dove in there, and then a little inscription on it. And it looks like it's a rock. It's been carved to look that way. And what it means is that life was not finished when the person died. In other words, the person died too early. The other one is Erich, E-R-I-C-H, and it has the temple marker on one side, the scroll in the front, the unfinished, and the finished part of it. This is in the German section. We have a huge German section along 27th. If you're good on any kind of German, there's a lot of stuff to read in German in that section. I mentioned earlier about infant mortality rates. This is Nettie. Nettie is 8 months and 14 days. Nettie has a name, and she's memorialized, literally sculpted on the top. If Nettie, I shouldn't say Nettie, a child that was stillborn, and the parent wanted to memorialize them, they would have an empty bed. We have a number of empty beds, which means the child that, in the Victorian era, you did not give a stillborn child a name. Today, they will allow you to do that. Half dozen, one or the other, but that's Nettie. 2 young boys, Georgie and Willie. These are the sons of Alexander Mitchell. One is 4 months, the other is 8 months. And Mitchell, whose marker's on the other side. Of course, Mitchell Street, the airport's not named for him. His grandson is General Billy Mitchell, who was on the property, but not in that particular picture. He's Wisconsin's first millionaire, banker, insurance, railroads was Mitchell's thing in life. Georgie and Willie, by the way, were originally buried in another cemetery. When Forest Home opened up, he moved them here and had that marker placed there. This is what's known as a Bedford tree stone. The symbolism here, and used quite a bit in the Victorian era, is that of a broken branch or a broken tree, symbolizing the end of life. And it's a style that kind of used a lot. A lot of it, sometimes it's just a column that's broken off. But this is a Bedford tree stone. Bedford is Bedford, Indiana, where they have the limestone quarries, and they're carved at that location. These were originally sold through for the Woodmen of America, which was an environmental fraternal organization, and this was what they sold. Eventually, these became popular enough that Sears catalog carried them for a number of years. As you will note, on the lower part here, again, we have the scroll concept, that the names are on the scroll, so therefore they have gone to heaven. They can be carved according to what you want. This is Mr. Phillips, and he's got his image on the front. This is kind of odd. His wife's image is not on there, but his image is on there. Okay, so, and he's got a flower pot in the front. In the back, there's some garden tools and a couple of mushrooms, and then you see the broken tree. And many different configurations. We have one of these, and we have debated what this pile of things that it looks like be a wood pile, but it's not a wood pile. I'm not going to show it here, but he was a cigar smoker. And back in the days, you could go to a cigar store, and they would have cigars wrapped with a ribbon around it, and you bought them that way, and he memorialized that way. We've got people who've got their horses on there, all kinds of stuff. We saw the little train monument before. This is the family marker. It's the Shuster family. The cross isn't quite come out in here, but there's a cross behind the broken branch, and then again, the wreath that's used here as a symbol of that. In each of these markers, except for Max, who's got the train, each of them is a log. And again, it's from the broken tree that they use it with the markings on front of the log. This is Thomas Hood. It's 3 books. Thomas Hood was an accountant. Okay, and so these are meant to be accounting books. Back in the day. I don't know what your church records are like here, but if you go to St. Paul's, the old church records, are tall books. They would stand about this high, heavy leather binding on them, so forth. Same kind of books would have been used by accountants back in the day for doing their entry work. I gave a tour to a group of librarians. When we hit this thing, they all had to have their picture taken with it because they were convinced they weren't accounting books, but they were library books that they would use. They were quite delightful. This is another marker. This is A.D. Lunt. Again, it's that temple style. It's not as clean as the others, but it's got the columns in the quarter. It's got the roof on the top. When I first came to Forest Home Cemetery, I was given a tour as a new board member, and they showed me this one, and I said, how could he put his name on there and not his wife's name? His wife was as famous as he was. His wife would have been Lynn Fontaine. This is Alfred Lunt's father, A.D. Lunt, and they're all buried there. Once a year, we get people from 10 Chimneys come out and do some kind of thing at their graves. And this is entrance to heaven. I've used that concept before. This is the Kiefer family marker, and it's got that temple-style entrance into it. As you'll note on each of the side, again, it's the wreath that's there as the symbolism. An interesting thing about the Kiefer family, Kiefer ran the National Enamel and Stamping Company in Milwaukee. They made enamel plateware, which was very popular in the late 1800s, early 1900s, until plastic took its place. Last time I saw that was a rented cottage in northern Wisconsin. Everything in there was enamelware. And one of the employees got the idea that they could take one of their pots and electrify it. And they played around with it, and lo and behold, they were able to come up with an electrified pot. Now, what were they going to call this pot? I want you to think of the name, National Enamel and Stamping Company. Nesco. It's the Nesco cooker, which every church must have had 2 or 3 somewhere. I know that we had one in the basement. My wife's grandmother had one in the basement. They were very, very popular. They sold very well. Kiefer sold the patent to a group of investors from New York and enjoyed his life. So, but that's the entrance to heaven concept that's there. This is another temple style. This is the Benjamin temple. I like this one, the way it's done and put together. As you can see, there's a tall obelisk in the background. And this is not far from where the Chapman Angel was. As I said, section 36 is the section you want to go to. And this just happens to be my favorite. If you want to save money and you want to see color in the fall, just drive to Forest Home. There's 2,600 trees on the property, all kinds of color that you want to see. You don't need to go to northern Wisconsin. You don't need to travel to New York State or wherever they have great color. You can go there and see it. By the way, in the cemetery business, this is known as a lake. You and I would call it a pond, but in the cemetery business, it's called a lake. Because when you're selling property, lake property is more valuable than pond property, okay? So, and a couple of other things for you just out of interest. You saw the Blatz Mausoleum earlier. This is how they brought all the granite into the cemetery. It's an 8-horse hitch. It's got a wagon that they're pulling, and it's got the material on it. The granite had to be brought to the train station, and then brought by wagon to Forest Home Cemetery. You can't, I don't know if you can see it very well. If you look at the wagon wheels, they're extra wide wheels to handle the weight of it rather than the traditional wagon wheel. And this is the crematory in the basement of the chapel at Forest Home Cemetery. Cremation has become the most popular option for final disposition in pretty much the U.S. The only place that has more traditional burial is the traditional South. Cremation in Milwaukee County is now approached 70% for final disposition. Reasons for that are many, but primary is it's a lot cheaper to be cremated than it is to have a traditional burial. It's like 70% cheaper than going through a traditional burial. And as I indicated, the families would come downstairs, they would push the cart in, there's 2 different chambers in there. And then you can see there's a little room in the back. That was the waiting room for people to wait for it. The last of the obelisks is this one. It's the Newhall House Fire Monument of 1883. You see a depiction of the fire. The greatest tragedy in the United States at that time, 70 people perished in the fire because they didn't have the ability to identify whose bones were who. They created a mass grave at Forest Home Cemetery, and most of them are buried there. Now, there were some exceptions to that. Some of the bones were taken to Calvary Cemetery, where there's a marker as well. But the question is, how did they know those were Catholic bones and not somebody else? And the simple answer is, it's where the maids lived. In 1883, who would have been the maids in the hotel? The Irish. Yeah. These ladies know their history over here. They got it down pat. The Irish. This is the corner of Michigan and Broadway. It's currently a hotel. If you've never been in, go in on the Michigan Street entrance and then walk into the basement and look up at the atrium that's in the building. The developer maintained the original atrium, and it's just a gorgeous piece, one that you should see. When they rebuilt this at this location, it was the second home of Northwestern Mutual Insurance Company. And the atrium was used to bring in light into the building because electrification wasn't that great at that point in time. And if you walk around the current building, you will find that even the basement has a lot of big windows to get light in because they wanted to commercialize that space. And that concludes the show at this time. I will open it up to any questions that you might have. And if I can impose upon you, did I lose this?
Just a reminder to use the mic for those who are watching the live stream for your questions.
Okay. Am I back on or not? Okay. I brought two other things along if you have an interest in the history. This is one of the Arcadia publications on Forced Home. It contains a lot of information about it. That is currently available. And the other is, this is the John Gerda history of Forced Home. There's not a lot of these left, and I don't think we're going to do another publication. We've sold 5,000, and we don't want to run another 5,000, take the risk of doing that occasionally. But some are currently still available at Forced Home. An interesting read. John spent almost an entire summer reading the minutes at St. Paul's Church because all the minutes of the cemetery were embodied in the minutes of the vestry. The cemetery was run by a cemetery committee, which you had to be a member of St. Paul's to be a member of the cemetery committee. And the committee then ran everything through the vestry, and it was kind of an interesting thing to read through everything that was there.
Paul, could you speak to the green burial you mentioned
green
before?
burial. This is one of the newer things in the cemetery business. Green burial means that you will be buried in a natural state. No embalming, no metal caskets or anything of that type. You are simply cleaned, wrapped, placed in either a pine box or a cardboard box. They actually make cardboard boxes for this. And lowered into the ground. There's no marker. You're buried in what's called a prairie grass setting. There is a marking on a large stone that's in the entrance to that particular area. And it's become very popular. It started in Britain and has come to the U.S. And it's, you can actually be cremated into it, or if you want full body, but it's meant to be natural. In other words, Mother Nature takes over as soon as the grave is closed. Far more traditional. A lot of people like that as an option. We do have markers so that we can GPS where your location would be if a family member wanted to know, which we can do. In Britain, they do these in 10-acre segments, maybe even larger. Once it's full, it's turned into a public park. Because there's nothing above ground, there's no markers, everything, and there's just a marker at the entrance, and it becomes a public park. question, you're going to need a mic.
In the green burial, is there nutritive value to the plants?
Pardon?
Is there nutritive value to the plants of doing a green burial?
The answer would ultimately be yes. From the decay that takes place with it, you will, in a few years, there's nothing left but bones. It all becomes natural.
So it is effective fertilizer.
Yes, the answer would be yes. Which leads to a lot of lines that I won't step on. Anything else that you?
Oh, yeah, let me ask one. From an economic perspective, Paul, if you've got less income coming in from all of these cremations, but then you still have to do all of the upkeep in perpetuity, I imagine, for all of those graves and monuments and mausoleums. How does that work? Is it a struggle?
The economics, as it evolved over the years, it was a question that they faced back in the 1850s. And by the time of the Civil War, they came up with the idea of a perpetual care fund. So for every sale of an in-ground burial, 20% is put in to a perpetual care fund, which is an endowment. It's just the cemetery parlance that uses perpetual care. It's an endowment. So you continue to do that. The issue is can you get enough invested to keep it going? The two most expensive things on the cemetery are cutting grass and then plowing in the winter, because we have almost 11 miles worth of roads throughout the cemetery, and you're going to plow, 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 plow. But cutting grass, we have 5 guys riding lawnmowers, some of them are gals, and we have 5 string trimmers go out every day. Because of the monument situation, you got to have working around all the monuments. In the what's called the park cemeteries, Wisconsin Memorial is a park cemetery, everything's flat. So you can drive your lawnmower over the top and not have to worry about it. So that becomes the way you do it. You have to have the perpetual care fund to do it. Now, I'm going to get into Episcopal history. In 1884, St. Paul's Vestry and Cemetery Committee went to the legislature and had a provision put into what's considered to be cemetery law that the cemetery could never be sold. Okay. And part of the reason is the bishop thought all of a sudden forced home had become a big deal and there was potential money there, that he might have some authority in that situation and therefore maybe require a little income from that. And they fought that. And so they codified it in state law, and that ended it. St. Paul's converted Forest Home into a community nonprofit in 2012. And the only provision is that 25% of the board has to be from St. Paul's, but it included a larger board, and probably needed to do that. You got to have some interest in doing this to be a board member, and a lot of people just didn't have an interest in being on a cemetery board. But back in the day, it was a prized position within the church. But that was back in the day.
Are the cemetery tours walking tours only, or do they also include like motorized vehicles where you get on, get off, and that kind of thing?
We do both. The motorized tours are generally tour companies. I've done just about every assisted living facility tours. They come with a bus, and we give them a tour accordingly. We have walking tours throughout the summer. Every Sunday afternoon, there is going to be a walking tour. Various themes that are there: cemetery, art, and symbolism. We have Civil War. We have over 1,100 Civil War veterans. We have generals. We have all kinds of those. We have a Civil War tour, if you're interested in Civil War. We have 2 tours on the women of Milwaukee, pre-1900, after 1900. We have the Beer Barons Tour, which I indicated earlier is probably still our most popular. We have famous Milwaukeeans and then not so famous Milwaukeeans. We have an industrial history tour. And coming online is an architecture. Milwaukee architects have a lot of architects at the cemetery. I'm currently working on a tour called Wicked Milwaukee. These are people who did some nefarious things. My favorite right now is a man by the name of Bigelow, who was a member of St. Paul's, president of First Wisconsin National Bank, who embezzled $2 million from the bank. And he went on vacation, and his brother was an auditor at the bank and discovered the $2 million missing, and he turned him in. He went to jail for 7 years. Bigelow's, they were big at St. Paul's until the embezzlement, as that goes. But there's all kinds of stuff. Unfortunately, a lot of the stuff that's reported is about ladies of the evening, and I don't know that that makes a great tour topic, but there's a lot of stuff like that. So we've done it in different ways. We also have a famous Germans tour. We have a lot of that. If you have an interest in other cemeteries in Milwaukee, the ones that you want to see are the Catholic Cemetery on Hawley and Blue Mound, Calvary. That really is a famous cemetery. And the other one is Union. I don't know if anybody knows where Union Cemetery is. It's Titonia and 35th. And the reason it's called Union is the 3 Lutheran churches went together, the 3 downtown Lutheran churches that were west of the river. Grace, that's on the either, that didn't go in with them. And they've moved everything because the city wanted them out. They were in the area where the freeway, so they were moved out and created a new cemetery at Union. It's interesting to go through. It's primarily all German, but it's large. It's nice. It's not an operating cemetery anymore. If you wanted information on it, you have to go out to Graceland Cemetery, and they have all the records and information on it at that point. Those are the 3 historic cemeteries in Milwaukee. Any other questions that you might have?
Is there much research on who the Native Americans were on the land before it was?
Well, the answer would be yes. Increase Lapham, who designed the cemetery, documented who was there. Primarily the Potawatomi and the Fox were the 2 tribes that were in that particular location. There may have been others, but they were small in number and more migratory as opposed to kind of planting themselves. The Potawatomi were there. What's currently called Forest Home Avenue used to be Janesville Plank Road. It's one of the city's plank roads. And the gate to the plank road was right there at the corner of 27th and Forest Home. Interestingly enough, Frederick Layton had a hotel right at the corner there. And that hotel also had holding pens for pigs and cows that were being brought for slaughter. So you'd come in from the countryside, come up Janesville Plank Road, stay overnight at Layton's Hotel, have your animals there the next day, drive them right down Muskego and down into the valley and take them to the slaughterhouses that were there. That's why the Laytons had a hotel, because they had a slaughterhouse. Okay. Anything? Oh, we could go on for hours. We probably should bring this to a close. Any final questions? Otherwise, we'll check our website for tours for the summer, and please join us. You're welcome.